Enter the Dragon represented a real second chance for Bruce Lee to become a Hollywood star. The Green Hornet was his initiation into the Hollywood system, and he had spent the years trying to become a movie star, and this looked like the opportunity. Hollywood knew who Bruce Lee was because he had been trying to make projects with Warner Brothers previously. And so when he made The Big Boss, and it became the biggest box office hit in Hong Kong history, and once his next two movies were also the biggest hits in Hong Kong film history, they knew he was a sensation. And so they felt like this was the moment to kind of seize. Robert Clouse had made a couple movies, and one of the movies had a very short action sequence, a fight scene, and they showed that to Bruce, and Bruce thought it was pretty good. And so he agreed to having Robert Clouse as the director. But the producer, Fred Weintraub, chose Robert Clouse, in his words, because we could get him for very little money. Bruce Lee didn't write Enter the Dragon. It was written for him by Paul Heller, the producer, and Michael Allen, the screenwriter. They wrote an 80-page script. Most movies are 120 pages. The reason it was 80 pages was for the sections that were fight scenes. They simply wrote, this fight scene will be directed by Bruce Lee. And so all the fight scenes were given over to Bruce Lee as the fight choreographer. When I interviewed Michael Allen, who wrote the screenplay, he said, basically, I stole everything I could from James Bond. James Bond was this kind of signature film of that period, and so that's how they pitched Enter the Dragon. It would be a Chinese James Bond film.
There. That's Han. That's the only film we have on him. We know that he was a member of your temple.
But the first thing you notice with Enter the Dragon is it doesn't have one star. It has three main stars. It has the white character, the black character, and the Asian character. And that's because even at that time, despite Bruce's success in Hong Kong, Hollywood wasn't fully confident that an Asian actor could carry an entire movie on its own. So it wanted what it called an international cast or multiracial cast, so it could appeal to different market segments. The studio was hedging its bets. In fact, it paid John Saxon, the white actor who plays Roper, more money than it was paying Bruce Lee. So it wasn't clear who was going to end up being the star. And Bruce was terrified that they were going to recut the movie, and Saxon would be the Green Hornet and he'd be the sidekick Kato again. And so Bruce Lee filmed the entire opening sequence at the Shaolin Temple in order to make certain that the movie opened with him and everybody knew that this was his movie. But the fact that Enter the Dragon had a multiracial cast in certain ways represented Bruce's own philosophy. His first kung fu student in America was African American. He was one of the very first instructors in America to be willing to teach kung fu to anyone of any race or ethnicity. He was criticized by other Chinese people who told him you can't teach kung fu to non-Chinese. He didn't consider himself either Chinese or American. He considered himself a human being, and he wanted to sort of preach that in the movies and also through his martial arts. One of Bruce Lee's goals as a filmmaker and an artist was to try to show the Western world something special about Chinese culture. This had been his goal in teaching kung fu as a young man. He wanted the world to see what was great about China. And so while this movie does have a very Hollywood lens to it, you get to see in little elements and details things that you didn't see in any Hollywood movies before. One of the most famous scenes is when the brawler wants to pick a fight with him when they're on the sampan, on the junk. And Bruce Lee tricks him, essentially, and he says, "My style is the art of fighting without fighting."
We can take this ball?
This phrase was made up by the screenwriter in conjunction with discussing it with Bruce. Bruce was kind of a guy who would like to start a fight, and he rarely backed off. But there was a part of him who knew that this was the Taoist tradition of trying to avoid conflict, and the art of fighting without fighting represented Bruce's better nature.
Hey, what the hell are you doing? Hey, are you crazy? Pull me in! Pull me in!
What was that? An exhibition? We need emotional content. Try again.
The scene where he says, "Don't think, feel" to the young student is core Bruce Lee. That's the kind of thing he taught to his own students. Bruce Lee was very unique in this sense of kind of connecting feelings to action. And one of the things you see in his films is that he is able to invest his action, the choreography, with emotion, and that's what makes them special. One of Bruce Lee's signature techniques was the screeching. And when you see anyone imitate Bruce Lee, these cat-like caterwauls are things they automatically do because it's part of his iconic image. In those parts, he's trying to represent the kind of animalistic nature of a fighter caught in this battle. And one time somebody asked him, and he says, "This is what I do in a real fight," but he never did in a real fight. He just made it up. And he seems to have only made it up in his movies. So tasting his own blood, or using his thumb to flick his nose, or the cat-like screaming, he's creating a persona. And so each movie he adds a certain aspect that becomes part of the signature. Bruce Lee is an action choreographer in Enter the Dragon, adjusts his style slightly from what you see in the 3 Golden Harvest movies because he was aware of the different Western sensibilities. And in fact, when the movie was released, it wasn't as successful in Hong Kong. And in part, it was because the film and its fight choreography was directed towards a more Western audience. So he tones it down slightly. You don't see Bruce Lee beating up 12 Japanese judo masters in one scene the way you see in, say, Fist of Fury. And Enter the Dragon, somebody gets knocked down and gets back up. And so the fight challenge matches have a more realistic feeling that would match what people would see in karate tournaments during that era in America. The original screenplay title of the film was Blood and Steel, and Bruce Lee hated it. He wanted it to be called Enter the Dragon because his screen name in Hong Kong was The Little Dragon, because he had been born in the year of the dragon, and as a young actor, they were searching for a screen name for him, and he was just this little spunky kid, and everyone in China knows him as Lee Little Dragon. So he wanted it to essentially be named after him. This was perfect branding for Bruce Lee to be the star. And Warner Brothers hated the name. They thought it sounded like a child's film. And the only reason he got them to change it is because the executives at Warner Brothers saw a kind of rough cut. And at that moment, they had a sense, oh, I think we've got something. And they planned on making it into a franchise. And Bruce said he wouldn't do the second or third movies if they didn't change the title to Enter the Dragon. So one of the things that's most bittersweet about Enter the Dragon is he died a month before it was released at the age of 32 from a cerebral edema, which means a swelling of the brain. Its cause has long been debated. The conclusion at the time was that he had an allergic reaction to aspirin. The movie was made for less than $1 million, and it went on to earn $90 million in 1 year in the West, and over the last 40 years, it's earned $350 million. So it's one of the most profitable movies that's ever been made. Enter the Dragon is the movie that made Bruce Lee an international star, and it's the movie most Westerners have seen. So he never lived to see the success he had worked his whole life for.